Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for one of our July faculty development sessions, Pre-Medicine Learner Mentoring, Things Have Changed, by Claudia Chambers and Monica Sanchez. I'm Dr. Jessica Seaman, Assistant Dean for Faculty Development in Creighton School of Medicine. I have just a few housekeeping items before I introduce our speakers. This session is being recorded, and you will have access to the recording and slide presentation for future reference. We invite you to submit any questions in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can by the end of the session. We do ask that you remain muted with video off unless asking a live question to assist us with the recording. Also, this session is eligible for continuing education credit, and you will receive the website and activity code before we conclude. There is a short survey associated with the continuing education, and we thank you in advance for providing feedback as we continue to build robust programming for our faculty and staff here at Creighton. Now, I am very excited to introduce our two presenters today. Dr. Claudia Chambers is Assistant Dean for Admissions and Associate Professor of Obstetrics and Gynecology in Creighton School of Medicine on the Phoenix campus. She is also an Assistant Clinical Professor in University of Arizona's College of Medicine. Monica Sanchez is the Director of Creighton School of Medicine's Office of Admission, also on the Phoenix campus. We're grateful to both Dr. Chambers and Ms. Sanchez for their willingness to share their time and knowledge around mentoring pre-medicine learners. So Dr. Chambers, if you're ready to begin, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you very much. Welcome everyone, and good morning to those of you who are in Phoenix, and good afternoon to those of you who are in Omaha. Today we're going to talk a little about how to support those who are interested in pre-medical education. I think that this is an important topic, and it came to the forefront for us as a result of many conversations that have gone on in the recent past. I'm new to the admissions committee. I like to share with people I've been on admissions. Come October will be about 2 years. And when I started on admissions, I realized that so much had changed since when I went to medical school. And I think it's really important that so many of us are the first line for young people who are interested in medicine, that we are tooled so that we can give them good advice and be effective mentors for them. I'd like to start by introducing the admissions team. Myself and Dr. Cavallari are the assistant. I'm the assistant dean, and he's the associate dean of admissions on the Omaha campus. Ryan Wessel is our director on the Omaha campus. As you met, Monica Sanchez is our director of admissions here on the Phoenix campus. And then we have Grace, Carolyn, and Abigail, who are our coordinators. So it takes a great deal of effort and a wonderful team to make this all a success on admissions. So thank you to our team, and many of the team members will be available for a Q&A at the end of this discussion. So why are we here? First, I'd like to tell you I have no disclosures. I wish I did. Then I would tell you that this is not an attempt to make you an expert at advising pre-medical students. We have resources available for that, including our admissions team. Really what we'd like to do is tool you to be able to help that neighbor or friend, or even your own children who are interested in medicine, or your scribe, or the individuals who you're likely going to be in contact with who are looking or exploring the field of medicine and really just need sound advice on how to go through this journey. We would like to give you those resources for the individual who may be considering medicine in the next 1 to 3 years. Certainly the advice would be different and tailored differently for those who may be in high school or earlier. Current state, I'd love to talk a little bit about the current state of medicine, which really drives what we're doing today in admissions. There is clearly an impending physician shortage, which I'll talk a little about, as well as the need for pipeline and pathway programs, because this journey to medicine is not only expensive, it takes a lot of time and effort. And we'll talk about that as well as some of the cost involved in becoming a physician. So I think the reality that so many of you are faced with every day is there are less and less of us in the field. We've known for some time that there was going to be an impending physician shortage. I would tell you that the AAMC data actually suggests that we are getting there faster than we ever anticipated. Based on some of the data after COVID, we're seeing up to 1 in 5 physicians retiring from the field or leaving the field altogether. And we know that this number of the number that's suggested here for the shortages in the different specialties is probably accelerated by several years because of the COVID pandemic. So we need these young people to go into medicine. We need people to replace us. We need people to strengthen our field. And so it's really up to us to share with those around us the benefits of becoming a physician, and also let them know that it's feasible for them. I think oftentimes I encounter students who don't think it's for them because whether it's cost or the time investment, or they feel like they're imposters and they don't think they're qualified. This is our opportunity to encourage individuals to see medicine as a viable alternative for them. The costs. This is really, for me, it was one of the most eye-opening parts of becoming part of the admissions team. I don't think I know a single person who came out of medical school who didn't have debt. But the kind of debt that our students are being faced with is extraordinary compared to when many of us trained. Now the average cost to an individual to go to medical school is upwards of $250,000. And the truth be told, that doesn't include undergraduate expenses or if you've done any post-grad work. So it's pretty costly, and it's important to remind those students who are looking at the debt that they may incur going into medicine, that there are options and ways to pay for that education, but also being very transparent with them about the fact that it is a costly experience, but it's an investment in themselves. When we look at the data, obviously there's some challenges when you look at private schools. You know, here at Creighton, we are not a land-based institution, and so the cost of education is significantly higher in the private schools. We do recognize that, and there are opportunities for scholarships and the like, but also funding through Pell Grants and the like. So it's really important to be able to share with students that even though they're looking at a significant amount of debt, that there are opportunities for scholarship and monies to support them in their educational experience. So the average time to become a physician, I think about this like, because anyone who knows me on admissions, I talk about the journey because it was a journey. At least for me, it felt like a journey. My journey took about 13 years. The average time to become a physician is anywhere between 11 and 16 years, depending on your specialty. I remember sharing my story, then hearing one of my colleagues share, who's a trauma surgeon, who shared that it took him 21 years. I think we really have to be transparent and honest about those who are interested in medicine and helping them understand that it's not a quick win. We come from a culture nowadays where people are looking for the easy, quick, microwavable experience. Medicine is not that. And I think being honest and transparent about that is really important for students or potential matriculants, because they really need to know that this is going to be, again, not just a long-term financial investment, but a time investment that pays off in the end, and that they need to really take steps to make sure that they're enjoying, as I always say, enjoying the journey.
Right, so on to me. What we really wanted to describe here is that previously there were a lot of students who were thinking, well, do I need to do a PhD first? Do I need to do an MPH before? No, now we have the opportunity to do dual or joint degrees. And so these are some of the joint degree opportunities out there. At Creighton specifically, we have an MD PhD, an MD MPH, an MD MBA, and an MD Masters, with 3 different masters available at Creighton specifically. So masters in bioethics, healthcare ethics, and medical humanities. So when talking to students, we really want to make sure that they have done a career exploration and are really making the decision for the right reasons and an educated decision. So having them ask themselves these questions: what kind of future appeals to them? Do you like challenges? Are you interested in science and how the body works? And obviously some of these questions are maybe a little bit more at the beginning of their career journey. So depending on whether you're talking to high school students or the start of an undergraduate degree at a first year in college versus a senior in college, these questions might differ. The other thing that they'll want to do is really learn about physician lifestyle and salary, and really the 3 types of physicians or categories that are designated. So a primary care physician looks different from a surgeon, which looks different from a specialist, and what that lifestyle might actually be in terms of the differences in lifestyle there as well. There are also different pathways to medicine. Sometimes people ask about a gap year. So there are different reasons to take a gap year. Gap year is not always a bad thing. Sometimes you didn't perform as well under your undergraduate degree as you would have liked. And there are remediation programs for that. We definitely believe in remediation at Creighton. And we actually have a master's and post-bac program in order to allow for people who did not perform as well in undergrad to remediate. People take gap years to do service, a lot of AmeriCorps and Jesuit Corps people. And then research. So we have people who do NHA fellowships and research years. And then some people who are just looking for personal growth during that gap year. And all of these are appropriate reasons to do a gap year. You're really looking to strengthen the application and yourself wherever there is a gap. In terms of applying to medical school, the first steps that we should suggest to any students you may be mentoring is suggest to get an advisor. A lot of people fail to reach out to the advising office in their undergraduate program, and there are a lot of resources there. So undergraduate advising offices and pre-med programs are a huge resource to students. They can also reach out to medical admissions offices depending on what part of their journey they're in. We do a lot of advising at Creighton. When should they contact an advisor? Probably the second they identify that they want to do medicine. It's never too early to start organizing yourself, your application, gaining experiences in order to pursue this career. What can they help with? Advisors can help with so many resources, whether it be talking about what prerequisites they should be taking, what schools really are a better fit for them, MCAT prep resources, which are huge because they can be quite costly without that in terms of practice tests and the like. Letters of recommendation, that's a hugely important thing. Some first-gen students may not even realize that they should be spending time with some of their professors to get letters of recommendation eventually, as well as the networking in terms of gaining experiences, whether that be service experiences, medical experiences, research experiences, etc. And what if your person that you are mentoring has been out of school for several years? They can still reach out sometimes to undergraduate programs depending on how far away they are from that. They can continue or actually pursue reaching out to medical admissions offices, as I suggested before. And then they should be researching the basics on the AAMC site. And that is how these people who've been out of school or maybe doing a complete career changer can get some more information about what their next steps should be. Which medical schools should I apply to and how many should I apply to? So according to the AAMC, the average number of schools students apply to through AMCAS, or what we call AMCAS, is 16. They should be strategic. Ideally, they should be applying to 8 to 10 schools that they're confident about. They should be doing the research on the schools as well to identify which schools create the type of physician they want to be. What type of school should they consider, MD versus DO? And then there's choosing the right school, and then MSAR is a resource on through the AAMC site that students can pay for in order to gain detailed information about admission statistics and requirements from all of the schools.
So as you have conversations with potential students, it's really important to talk to them about the full breadth of opportunity that lies out there for them. Certainly, there's the option of going to MD school, and as many of you know, or are DOs, there's also the opportunity to go to DO school. Generally, when we talk about the difference between the two, there are some subtle differences. It is a different application process. Through the MD program, you apply through AMCAS, and through DOs, it's AACOM. And truthfully, I try to talk to students about the fact that, though I think we're becoming more holistic in allopathic medicine, I do believe at the end of the day, DOs tend to take a more holistic approach to medicine, and that's really kind of the difference, as well as some of the manipulative treatments that they can do. But essentially, the application cycle looks very similar. There are a lot of similarities between the two. They will be required to shadow. Many of the schools require shadowing a DO, not just an MD. And so just making sure that if students are exploring that opportunity or considering DO school versus MD school, that they really do their research on what's required for either, and making sure that they're meeting those requirements. The benefit of looking at a DO school is that, thank you, the benefits of considering DO school versus MD is it broadens their opportunities. You'll find that with the DO schools, the GPA acceptances may be a little bit lower, and they also they accept more of their students overall. Next slide, please. There are significantly more MD schools and more spots, but again, like I said, the acceptance rate is slightly higher in our DO schools. And as many of you know, once you get past your initial medical school training, everything really just kind of merges at the time of residency. So the pathway may diverge initially, but at the end of the day, I tell people you all end up practicing in the same places in the same way. Fellowships are still available. So I really do think it's an important part of the conversation, allowing people to know that there are opportunities both in MD as well as DO schools. When we think about the application process, just for your education, there's both a primary application for the MCAS as well as a secondary application, and then the MCAT. Those are really the three kind of major parts of how the process will look. I'm going to go through specifically kind of in an order that most people are actually encountering their experience, so that as you walk a student through the experience, you can walk with them, knowing that the first thing that they're going to deal with is their MCAS application, which you can assist them with. They're probably going to take their MCAT either before or after they submit their MCAS. We see both. And then once they've submitted that primary application, depending on what criteria are required to be met for each institution, then they will be sent or invited to complete a secondary application. The application components are pretty straightforward and consistent for every application. It looks at academics, the MCAT, as well as your GPA, and we'll talk specifically about the requirements in each of those areas. They're also looking for experiences, including medical experiences, non-medical experience, research for certain schools. But again, whether you do research or not, there's an opportunity for you to reflect on that on your MCAS application, as well as extracurricular activity. Other components of the application include a personal statement, a letter of recommendation. These are all areas where you can really support a potential applicant. A personal statement is something you can help them review. Letters of recommendation, we'll talk about that as well. You can offer letters of recommendation. And then finally, there are special considerations on the application, i.e. if there's deficiencies they want to speak to in particular. There's also the opportunity to speak to if they have a disadvantaged status, meaning they're coming either from a rural area or an area that is underserved, or if they have financial or familial issues that may have contributed to challenges that they've either had to overcome or have been successful at mitigating. And then institutional actions, unfortunately, we do see these. It's really important. We'll talk a little bit about helping a student know how to approach that conversation in their application and interviews. There are fees involved in the application cycle. For many students, that can be a hurdle for them. It's important to remember that there are opportunities to address those fees. Keeping in mind what Monica had mentioned, that if the average student is applying for 6 to 10 applications, it can get really costly. And so there is a fee assistance program through the AAMC. There's information regarding that. Students can only apply for that once. It can be helpful in assisting in the covering the cost of their applications, including their secondaries. And it can be a significant benefit for those who are struggling with any sorts of difficulties with paying fees. It's important to remember that this year that they've expanded and removed some of the eligibility requirements. One of those things is you do not have to be a US citizen. And then the other thing is it does require a US address. They have removed the requirement for parental financial information for students over 26. Most schools will honor the financial assistance program. If you've been accepted into the financial assistance program, many schools will waive the fees or any fees associated with the secondary application as well. The application, it's really important to remember what the application's role is, and the application is really about highlighting the individual's accomplishments. And so as you help students to put together their application, keep in mind that it's really, it's their opportunity to brag about the things that they've done well. And then one of the things that the admissions committee is very sensitive to, and you really want to speak to when you're counseling students, is helping them to see that when they put in the hours, the MCAS application does ask you to reflect on the number of hours that you spent, not to embellish on the hours. I mean, if you're sleeping, you can't be working. So try not to put hundreds or thousands of hours, include sleep hours or what have you. And sometimes it's not intentional, but really want to objectively say, this is how many hours I spent doing that activity, or face-to-face hours is kind of the way that I like to think of it. And then other things that you can assist in is reviewing applications for any spelling or grammatical errors, and then helping the student have a kind of a consistent message or theme throughout their application. Again, as you're reviewing or helping them prepare their applications, those are things that you can do that are very helpful to them. Core competencies, there are several core competencies that are reflected on in the application. These just kind of are the 4 kind of domains in which the application as well as the interview, we're trying to capture that individuals have these skills which are necessary for medical school. So good interpersonal skills and intrapersonal skills. They have that critical thinking and reasoning, as well as they understand the basic science behind what we do in everyday in medicine. This kind of just talks about the metrics that we look at. Again, we'll dive a little deeper into each of these as we talk about these areas, but academic metrics, really we want to understand that the student can manage the rigors of medical school. As far as the experience tab goes, those really looking at, do they have community service, leadership experience? Have they shadowed? Do they know what it looks like to be a physician? Have they done enough research that they can understand the benefits and the pros and cons of being a physician? And then do they have any leadership experience? That counts as well. And then demographics, again, speaks to those things that we talked about. Are they from a rural area, underserved area? And then other data, we have the interview to kind of collect other data about those core competencies.
Sorry about that. All right. So one of the main components of an application that probably makes applicants a little nervous is GPA. So they have both a cumulative GPA and what we call a BCPM. So those are biochemistry, physics, and math. It is important for students or potential applicants to know that the AAMC actually defines these. When you submit an application, your primary application, you submit a transcript, and then the MCAS, when they are processing your application, designate how many of those courses or hours fall under the BCPM category. This is important because most schools have hour requirements as a prerequisite requirement of how many BCPM hours you must show. For us, it is, I believe, 40. And in terms of BCPM GPA, that is really what medical schools are looking at. We are looking at how well you did in those courses because they are the best indicator for your success in medical school curriculum versus every other type of course that you might have taken in your undergraduate work. Other considerations that we look at when it comes to GPA are withdrawals, retakes, and failures. So you may have a high GPA, but maybe you withdrew from several classes, and that may indicate a trend in terms of backing out of a difficult class, right? As you know, you're not going to do as well. There are just some indicators for success in medical school as well. As we talked about earlier, we do believe in remediation at Creighton. So when should students be considering remediation? Well, they should consider it when they do have a low science GPA. So they can kind of track their own courses in terms of what might fall under biochemistry, physics, and math. And if their science GPA is on the lower end, that will be a reason for them to seek out a remediation program. Further from that is a down ramp. That's another thing that we're looking at. So we are anticipating that your science GPA will increase as you get into your core coursework and upper division coursework. However, if that goes down, then that is also kind of a red flag. Older science coursework, so say you graduated 10 years ago, did a completely different career and want to change, or maybe you took 4 years off between, and then at that point your science coursework is dated. The same thing for non-traditional, that would be another career change, or maybe you did an undergrad in the arts and decided 2 years later you wanted to become a physician, then you have to go back and do some sort of program in order to get some of that basic science knowledge and some of those prerequisite courses as well. The AAMC does have a list, and this link is here, of all of the different post-bac programs that exist and are registered with the AAMC. What are the pros and cons of doing any post-bac work? Now, just to be clear, a post-bac program can be both a degree-seeking master's, or it can be a certificate program that's not degree-seeking. So some of the pros are it can extend access to advisors. So again, in those career-changing moments, or non-traditional moments, medical school linkage program. So we have, as I mentioned, a medical master's program as well as a post-bac program that is linked to our medical school. We are familiar with those students. We meet with them regularly, so that can increase your advising and really knowledge and network. Built-in volunteer opportunities. So I know our programs have some service components to them. And so if you need to gain networking in that regard, you can get those experiences there. Exclusive, and this goes on with the exclusive networking and programming. If you are interested in programs, or your prospective student is interested in a research-heavy program, but they did not have the opportunity to do research in their undergraduate work for whatever reason, they could potentially get involved in research within those remediation programs. Sometimes they have flexible structure and scheduling, especially for those non-traditional workers who are maybe married, have children, are working. Some accelerated coursework, so they're usually 1 to 2 years. And then they provide sometimes a lot of Mcat preparation, which is huge for those who have maybe attempted at applying medical school, but were in the end not successful because of a low Mcat score. Some of the cons are that, again, it's an additional expense. And those certificate programs are not always eligible for financial aid because they are non-degree seeking. They can range from 1 to 2 years. So again, you are adding more time to your timeline. And then again, those programs that award a certificate while others grant a master's degree, you know, if in the end you complete a certificate program, you do walk away without an additional credential if you aren't successful again in applying to medical school, where a master's degree may lead you to other career opportunities. So another big component of the application, and especially at Creighton, is medical service, or everywhere, sorry. So we have traditionally done a lot of physician shadowing. With COVID, really that has changed the landscape of how prospective applicants gain medical experiences. Hospitals and clinic volunteer work has also been limited because of the obstacles of getting students in as observers or volunteers. So what happened, a lot of students ended up doing a lot of virtual shadowing. You know, especially as COVID has enhanced telemedicine, that has been very useful. And then a lot of them moved into employed medical experiences. So as Dr. Chambers mentioned earlier, you may be getting messages from your scribe asking how to make themselves more competitive for medical school. Same for your MA, nursing, EMT. These are all big experiences that provide students with that knowledge in medicine, the experiences on a healthcare team, and really understanding and witnessing the role of a physician on the healthcare team, which is all really important and something you really want to gain before applying to medical school. As I mentioned earlier, non-medical service, super important. At Creighton and most mission-driven schools will have an important emphasis on non-medical service. So what are the keys to success when it comes to non-medical service is continuing to serve. So avoiding gaps in there if you can. Ensuring, so again, ensuring service is ongoing. So just because you submitted your application doesn't mean you stop doing all service. And then really there are different types of non-medical service. And we really are looking for hands-on service, so that direct service to underserved communities. And then research. So for those research-heavy schools and students who are looking to potentially get into those research-heavy schools, they should really be consulting with their pre-med advisors and counselors in order to gain that network and find projects that they can be added to. And obviously there are specifics when it comes to the region and the state and the type of research that's being conducted.
So the personal statement is really, it's not going to get you into medical school, but it certainly, if not done well, could be a red flag for the committee. When you're assisting your students with the personal statement, which I think this is going to be an area where many of you are going to have an opportunity to be supportive and help them along the process, I always encourage those who are mentoring pre-med students, make sure they have multiple people read their personal statement. I always say you need somebody to read it who's like your mom, who's going to tell you it's wonderful, somebody who's going to read it with the red pen of redemption, and somebody who's a surgeon or critical is going to be really critical about the personal statement, so that they really have a well-rounded kind of evaluation and assessment of their personal statement. We generally like to see, at least here at Creighton, where they kind of avoid that eye trap, where they're talking about their experiences and they're telling their story and their journey, but oftentimes it can come off a little bit disconcerting when it's always about I am wonderful, I am this, I am that. If there's opportunity to talk about and reflect on their experiences and how that may have changed them or drawn them into the field of medicine, I think that's a good way to approach it. And then I always tell students to tell your story. How did I get here? Where did this start for me, this desire to go into medicine? And how did I get here? And what has reinforced my desire over time? And then look for that compelling statement or compelling angle that helps the reader see and understand that this is real for them and that there's a true and meaningful desire to become a physician. Letters of recommendation. So this is also an area where you will likely have a lot of opportunity to support a student or potential matriculant. Letters of recommendations or committee letters, first and foremost, remember that if their school has a committee letter, they should first find out if their school has a pre-med or advising committee where they can provide a committee letter, because if they have one, they should get one. If they have a committee and they don't have a committee letter on their file, it is definitely a red flag for the admissions committee, and we do look at that. If that's not the case, then they may need individual recommendations, and that's okay too. If you're going to write a letter of recommendation for the student, I always give them advice on how to ask, not just me, but everyone else they might ask for letters of recommendations from. Because so many of us are busy, in particular, those of us who are clinicians, I tell them to ask these specific questions explicitly. Are you comfortable giving me a good recommendation? Do you feel like you know me well enough? And do you need an example letter, or do you need additional resources to provide that recommendation? I encourage students to give you a runway. In fact, I often tell them, if you're asking a clinician to write a letter, give them a runway such that you don't need that letter for a month after you've asked for it. That way they have time in their busy schedules to sit down and really write a meaningful letter. And then again, there's nothing worse than a lukewarm or short letter that shows that you don't know the individual well. And so when you write your letters, we ask that you would make sure that you feel like you can, one, write a good letter, that it's a meaningful letter that shows that you have depth of understanding who that person is, but also that when you're encouraging them to go out and solicit those letters, that they're looking for the right individuals who can speak to them and speak to who they are and why they're well suited for medicine in a way that reflects well on them as a candidate. So anyone who's a physician or has done this walk knows that there's going to be bumps in the road. And whatever those bumps are, it's really part of the natural process. We actually think that that's a good sign. It's a good sign to know that you've been through something, you can get back up, or you've got the grit and resiliency to be able to be a successful physician. The committee actually reflects well on that. However, it's how you address that in your application, your interviews, and the like that's really critical. So as you're advising students, and this happens more often than not, they may ask you about, well, I've had this particular shortcoming. How do I deal with this? What do I say in my application? Do I speak to it in my interviews? And we usually like to say, stick with the simplest and easiest way to reflect on it. Be transparent and honest. and then be able to speak to what happened. Never gloss over it. Don't pretend it didn't happen. Things like institutional actions and the like are oftentimes things that we see. And I see a question in the chat that I love. Is it insurmountable having institutional action? It really depends on the nature of the institutional action, whether or not they're repeated actions that can be challenging, and exactly how that person approaches it or speaks to it. And that's why I think that's really important to be honest and transparent and open, because sometimes it's very hard to understand what happened in that event or whether or not that person is taking responsibility, but definitely the committee is looking for that. We want people who are going to take ownership and responsibility for any shortcomings or actions. The MCAT. Anyone who's gone to med school knows that this is like the massive hurdle to get over. I think one of the things that was really helpful to me as I entered the admissions committee was really getting a sense of what's going on in the area of the MCAT. By the way, for many of you who trained in the same era as me, there is a new MCAT. I was advising advising a student at some point, and I remember one of my colleagues, our office mate, when I said the score or the average score for the MCAT, she looked up and said, I have no idea what you're talking about. Yes, there is a new MCAT. It looks very different from our MCAT in a number of ways. It is actually really focused on really getting to the crux of whether or not students have good critical thinking skills. It is broken up slightly differently as well. There is the biological and biochemical foundations of living systems. There's Chem Phys, as well as a psychosocial portion of the exam, and then a critical analysis and reasoning skills portion. Having said that, the exam is very different in some other ways. The scoring system is different as well. The time, our exam was about 5 hours. It's now 7.5 hours. So it's a pretty intense, high stakes exam. Next slide, please. Each section is scored up to 132 points. And for an overall range of somewhere between 472 to 528, which would be a perfect score. And we get a percentile for each of those blocks. Next slide. So there is, for each person, each individual, they'll have a specific score for each individual area, and then they'll get a percentile rank score. What we see and have seen over the past few years is every year there's a slight trend upwards in that overall score. So that average kind of tends to trend higher each cycle. And so as we're advising students, you'll see later on in our conversation, we'll share with you the Creighton, our Creighton MCAT scores, our mean and our averages, but we tend to see a trend upward each year. So as you're advising students, it's important to look at the snapshot of where each school is during the application cycle, knowing that there's probably going to be a bend or a transition towards a slightly higher score each year. General advice for taking the MCAT, I think this is also very important because it is a different exam than we've taken. I think most of us are very familiar with the fact that high stakes exams don't go away in medicine. It's important to know that skill set and have that skill set for taking those types of exams. So start preparation and practice early. I always recommend that if they can get into a study group, that they should. It's part of how we, how we get to a point where we can learn from one another and share one another's skill set and opportunities for students who may be weaker in one area to practice with somebody else who has a stronger skill set in another. There are some AAMC resources that are available. They should tap into those if they can. And then also, I always tell students to invest in themselves. MCAT courses are expensive, but I think the skills that you need to take high stakes exams are ones that are going to be necessary for future exams, for your STEPS, and as well as your long-term future. And so I encourage them, if they can afford it, to invest in a program if they can. The secondary application, just remember that certain schools are going to have either a GPA or an MCAT cutoff. This is critically important, because some people don't recognize that the process is ongoing. And so they may submit their AMCAS application, their MCAT score comes in a little bit later or what have you, and they expect that they're going to hear back from an institution immediately. They don't always. The next step in the process is getting a secondary application. If they meet that cutoff, they'll get an invite for the secondary. Once they've sent their secondary in, those will be reviewed and for most institutions on an ongoing basis. So even though their secondary may have been sent in, let's say, for instance, August or September, based on the ongoing review of applications, they may not actually get an interview till January or February. And that's important because oftentimes they'll come back to you asking, hey, I haven't heard anything. What should I do? Should I be worried? Does that mean I don't have a chance this cycle? And not at all. It may mean that their application hasn't been reviewed, or they're going to get reviewed later in the cycle. And then for faculty, it's important to remember that if you feel like there's a candidate that you've worked with, that you know well, that you think is absolutely Creighton material, that we appreciate getting those endorsements. Those are put on their file. It then allows us to do a deep dive on that application. Oftentimes, though, I will tell you, we get endorsements, and I think people think that by definition, an endorsement means they're automatically guaranteed some things. That's not the case. All admissions to the medical school is done by committee, and we have a very large committee. So an endorsement in and of itself really is just an opportunity for us to take a closer look at an applicant. But at the end of the day, the decision to enter medical school or acceptance for medical school is a committee decision. Interviews, most schools have moved to either a virtual interview or some type of hybrid version of the interview. If a student gets past the point of secondary application and is invited for an interview, there's some key things that you can do to help support them in the process. I think it's really critical to help them with their practice interviews. As faculty and staff, you can actually go through some of the standard questions that they'll see in interviews. There are also online some repository of common questions. That's a great way to kind of help them practice how to interview, especially if they're doing a virtual interview. It's even harder to make those connections, those natural connections that you would have in an in-person interview. So helping them to kind of practice, make sure that they're having a good virtual presence when they interview, those are things that I think can be really helpful for a potential applicant. And then teaching them, or at least reminding them, that everyone in the process has value, and to be polite and respectful of everyone. That means everyone from the coordinator to the people that answer the phones because those are things that we hear about later on. And so something like a slight of maybe a student interviewer or someone of the like can actually come back to haunt them in the application process. Also, remember not to become too familiar. So making sure that you remind them that this is a professional interview. So even though it may be a student interviewer who's not much older than or the same age, that they have to not allow themselves to become too familiar in that process. One of the other things that I think is critical is encouraging them to research the mission of every school. I think you're hard pressed to go to an interview and not have an institution or the interviewer ask you, why our institution? And it shows kind of poorly if you don't actually understand the vision and mission of that institution. Here at Creighton, obviously, vision and mission are critical to who we are. And so it's part and parcel of the interview process. And so we do look at how a student responds to that question and whether or not it looks like they've taken the time to really understand who we are. The AMSAR, I think we'd mentioned before, is a great resource to do any research about each institution, and then going to their websites as well to understand the vision of that institution is I think, critical. Updates. Every school is different this way, so it's really important to make sure that you've encouraged the students or applicants to look into what that school's mantra is on updates. We are an update-friendly school. In fact, we encourage students to update us with things that are meaningful. Our admissions team is limited. We don't want emails and calls and letters every day. That's not helpful. However, if there is something meaningful that's changed in their experience and they want to share that, they've done more service or they embarked on some new interesting adventure that really adds value to their application, those are things that we think they should update. If they, let's say, for instance, are put on a wait list And our admissions team will give them some advice or give them information on maybe why they were waitlisted, or they may meet with them and understand that maybe they needed to do more service, or they needed to get more medical experience. When we ask you to do that, when we ask a candidate to do that, the expectation is that they will. If they do not, the admissions team will look at that as a lack of interest. So I would encourage you to suggest to potential candidates, if there is a mention of some way that they can bolster their application, that not only that they do it, but they update us on what they've done, and that keeps them in the running for a position when we relook at potential waitlist candidates.
All right, so in the end, as Creighton faculty, what we want to know is, how does this apply at Creighton, right? What makes a Creighton student? So the main thing that I feel like you should take away from this is that at Creighton, we are a mission-focused admissions team, and we conduct mission-focused admissions. So we're going to talk a little bit about what our mission and culture is, and how we value service here at Creighton over research a little bit. Not that research is not something that is very productive here, but we look at, and we're going to look at our average Mcat and Gpa scores for the most recently, or the incoming matriculating class of 2026. And we just want to remind you all again that in order for prospective student or applicant to be invited to complete the secondary, they must meet a minimum of a 498 overall MCAT score just to get the invitation to complete the secondary. All right, so I think this is something that maybe our Omaha faculty live and breathe so well, right? You're very ingrained in our Jesuit values, and here in Phoenix, I think our faculty do this maybe unbeknownst to themselves. But for us, our mission is deeply rooted in our Jesuit values and pillars. And so what that means is that we are women and men for and with others. We have a strong focus on service to others, especially underserved communities, and social justice. We are looking for empathy, compassion, and then care for the whole person, or career personalities. And so what we really want to think about is, does this applicant fit mission? So in terms of the most recently completed cycle that is going to produce the class of 2026 coming next week to both of our campuses, we had an original pool of 6,388 primary AMCAS applications completed and submitted to Creighton. We had 4,241 secondary applications that were completed. We then narrowed that down and interviewed a total of 842 applicants. And we are matriculating a total of 230, with 130 going to Omaha and 100 coming here to Phoenix. Of note, I wanted to let you all know, with this new cycle opening up, we will be increasing the Phoenix class size to 120 seats for a total of 250 matriculants. So this incoming class of 2026, and now these are combined statistics for the entire class across both campuses, we had a cumulative undergrad GPA of 3.4. The undergraduate science GPA, or BCPM, as we mentioned earlier, was a 3.8. Those who completed a post-bac program was a 3.99, and those who completed a graduate degree had a science GPA of a 3.77. So obviously these typically this one's typically a little bit higher because it is a remediation program, and you're proving to schools or to whoever's reviewing your application that you have remediated your undergraduate. So typically students are performing a little bit higher in these remediation programs. In terms of the MCAT, we did have a range. Our lowest was a 504 with our highest of a 526, and our average being or a median being a 513. You'll also see here the categorical breakouts of those 4 categories that Dr. Chambers reviewed earlier, and the percentiles that class scored on average in each of those sections. So in terms of demographics, we have 108 males coming in, 122 females. 16% of the class is first generation. 9.6% are underrepresented minorities as designated previously by the AAMC, which is a little bit more limited. And then 33% had some sort of other ethnic status outside of the URM categories. In terms of the entering ages, again, we have a range because there are different ways to get to medicine. 20 at the youngest, 36 as our oldest, and 24 is our median. And we have 12 students coming into our class that are 26 and older. In terms of where these people are coming to us from, we have 93 different undergraduate universities and colleges that are represented in this class. 31 states that were represented in terms of their state of residency, and the top states that we're bringing in from are California, as always, Arizona, Colorado, Minnesota, Illinois, Nebraska, Washington, and Wisconsin. You'll see we even have someone from Puerto Rico coming in here. We had 45 different undergraduate majors. Obviously, we have our popular STEM majors, but I was shocked to see that a non-STEM major was in the top 4. But a total of 33 non-STEM majors coming in, including these 12 in psychology. Some of those other non-STEM majors included psychology, foreign language, economics, art, philosophy, and we had 29 students coming in with some sort of advanced degree. So what does the cycle look like at Creighton? So usually we receive the AMCAS application information initially at the beginning of July, usually around the 4th of July weekend. That is when AMCAS transfers all that data. So of note, if you have a student who submitted their application when the application portal opened, I believe in May or the end of April, and they haven't heard from us in July, we don't even have that information yet. We don't know that they've applied to us until we get that data dump from the AAMC into our admission software. At that point, our secondary invitation is sent out for anyone who has listed an MCAT with a 498 or above, and that can happen anywhere from July to January. So the primary application deadline for AMCAS is in November, but for our secondary application completion date is in January. So you can get a January completion date if you submit it in November. Completion and verification of secondary applications happen from July to January. So our coordinators have to manually go in, make sure that there are the appropriate numbers of letter of recommendation in there. They have all of their, headshots and whatnot. Everything is complete, and then they have to manually mark it complete. So they do that from July to January. Then we go into the screening of applications for interviews. And so interviews typically begin at the end of August. So we start screening at the beginning, and that runs to February. We then start with our interviews. Interviews begin in August, as I mentioned, and typically around March. Then they go into committee review. So we start reviewing pretty immediately after that first week of interviews. So September through May, our committee meets weekly, barring, holidays and whatnot. And we start sending accepts. We cannot notify anyone that has been accepted from that end of August until October 15th. So they may have interviewed at the end of August, been on that first week of interviews, but will not hear from us until October 15th. That's a AAMC rule. And they can really receive notification until the end of May in terms of our regular cycle of committee meetings. But we do have sometimes some late admits, people withdraw and whatnot. And so that decision can happen until July 1st. July 1st is our commit to enroll deadline. And then obviously they matriculate in August. Applying to Creighton, this is a common question we get from faculty, is it is a single application. So when you are advising students to apply to Creighton, make sure they know that when they go into AMCAS, they're only going to see one application, regardless of the fact that we have 2 campuses. So we're a single application school. They will indicate which campus they prefer to be at when they complete their secondary. There is a question there. And then we admit according to their preference until one of their campuses in full, which has historically been Phoenix for the last couple of years just because we have fewer seats. Once they are admitted, and once our campus is full, then they are admitted to a campus, to Creighton in general. So whichever campus has an open seat, and then they're added to the wait list in terms of their campus preference. I believe for the most part, we have gotten this year everyone into their preferred campus. Last year, I believe there were 2 late admits that did not get their campus preference, but we're happy to be in medicine nonetheless. The other thing to note here is that our committee is actually blinded to campus preference. So we are trying to maintain the integrity of what it means to be a Creighton student across both campuses. So our committee is not making any preferential decisions based on which campus that student indicated they are wanting to be at. Obviously, in personal statements and answering some questions, they may give way to what their preference is, but in terms of that specific question, it is blinded. And our committee is made up equally of Phoenix and Omaha faculty. But our big message is we are one school, two campuses. What is their place on the alternate list? So I think Dr. Chambers referenced this a little bit earlier. So we rarely decline an applicant. We do hold on to our students. We create what we call our alternate list, which is what most schools would call a wait list. It is unranked. As Dr. Chambers mentioned, we do review alternates a few times during the cycle. And really what's going to set those students apart is if they attended our in-cycle feedback session. So Ryan, my counterpart, who's on the call today, and myself host 4 hours of drop-in office hours every Monday during the cycle, where students who received a decision of alternate list can come in and get feedback, exactly what the committee said was needed to be bolstered on their application. Then the idea is that during that time between when they get that decision and we review alternates, they do whatever it was that they find the experiences they needed and figure out a way to strengthen their application. And then during that alternate review, those will be taken into consideration. Again, Creighton is a very update-friendly school. Some schools do have limits. Some schools have a limit of 5 updates throughout the year. We do not have a limit, so that is important to note. And again, as I mentioned earlier, our commit to enroll deadline is July 1st. So by July 1st, they need to have made a decision. And really that concludes what we had planned to speak about in terms of what makes a Creighton student and how things have changed.
So on that final note, we value your role in this process with our pre-medical students, are those who are interested in medicine. You are the front lines. That's how I see it. And so it's really important that you're tooled and effective at being able to support these young people. Keep in mind that we are looking for a diversity of backgrounds and experiences, and that there are so many opportunities for us to help these young people to enter the field of medicine, and we need each and every one of them. So yes, a lot has changed. Now we do gap years and MCAT looks different, but at the end of the day, the end goal is the same, that we would have a large cadre of physicians that reflect our values and mission here, faith in action. That's what we're looking for. All right, so thank you. We will take this time to answer any questions.
So I do see a question. Do you have a preference as to how alternates convey updates? Yes, our updates are done through our secondary application portal. They can also email our medadmissions@creighton.edu general email to submit those if they're having trouble, but typically they do get updated in that secondary portal.
And Monica, there was a good question at the beginning from Holly, and she was asking about the difference between a W and a C in the first 2 years. Is one preferable to another?
I think that's a complex question. The answer to that is not simple. Really, at the end of the day, the undergraduate GPA could be affected by that C. It could be detrimental if the rest of the grades are lower. But certainly if it's something where that W is a persistent issue, so they're getting more and more withdrawals, or there's a pattern of withdrawals, that's going to be even more problematic. I think that each individual that answer is going to differ. I don't know your thoughts on that, Monica.
No, I would agree. And I know Ryan's on the call too, so he's welcome to unmute himself and answer if he has anything else to contribute to that. And then there was a question in terms of what does it mean by institutional action? So usually institutions, so higher education institutions, have certain rules and regulations. A lot of times these are students caught in the dorm with alcohol and sort of infractions of that, like sometimes I think we had someone who stole a bicycle off a bicycle rack, things like that. Those are usually, or sometimes they can be academic probationary periods as well. And so again, like Dr. Chambers said, it's all about how you address them.
Social media. So we don't routinely look at social media, but on occasion we have been known to review social media. I tell people, and I encourage you to share this with students and potential applicants, that your presence matters. We may not be looking at it, but other schools might. And at the end of the day, some of what's posted on social media can come back to haunt you. So we're looking for professionals. So I think it's critically important that they continue to maintain a professional demeanor, even on their virtual presence. Did we cover everything? I don't see any.
Where would a student find an example letter to send to a faculty member is another question.
There's lots of resources online, but the AAMC also has some resources as well that speak specifically to how to write a good letter. So if it's the first time you're writing a letter of recommendation for a student, it really walks you through those areas that you should highlight in your letter, how long you've known the person, who you are, what your relationship is. Some of the qualities you want to highlight in your recommendation. So there are some good resources through the AAMC as well.
Yeah, I've certainly written a lot of letters, but I have other colleagues who haven't yet to write a letter. So if a student would say like, I was asked to provide a letter, where do I get it? Then I can just refer them to the AAMC, right? Yeah. Okay.
And the other thing is, if there's a really good letter writer, I was talking to one of my colleagues yesterday and he said he's written 50 letters this year. If you know somebody who's a good letter writer in your department, on your faculty, I oftentimes will say, hey, can I borrow your letter so I can take a look at how you structured your letter? That's a really good way to build one too.
And I can put some examples and the link to the AAMC example letter. I can put that in the follow-up information that I send out. So I do think we are out of time. Thank you so much, Monica and Dr. Chambers, for all of this great knowledge for any kind of mentoring and advising that we are doing with pre-medicine learners. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I did pop in our medadmissions@creighton.edu email that will reach our team both in Omaha and Phoenix, and it's our very small team. So if you have any additional questions we didn't get to, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.